becomes like a fleeting memory. Whatever you grab just turns to dust. Like eye contact with a stranger around a crowded room is a dream begging to be real.
You do it.
I want to. A glimmer of the shifting sea. You think you saw it, you think you see it.
I can't get settled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's because we don't want to like spend the first 10 minutes settling. So
No, I think we can just get right into it.
you think so?
I think so. I feel unsettled, but maybe a little feisty. So
Ooh.
that could be good.
Oh,
Hell
feisty.
yeah!
I like feisty.
I think it's Alison. She just brings out the feistiness.
Hey, to the shores.
To the shores.
Sorry for this inelegant glass.
Yeah, I feel somewhat offended that you brought your giant Yeti in here with water in it.
I'm sorry. I can't do whiskey anymore.
It's okay. I understand.
I'm with you in spirit,
Mm-hmm.
in the spirit of whiskiness.
I like the spirit of whiskiness.
Yeah. I could pour my water in the glass.
You could. Should have thought of that earlier.
Yeah.
It's
Too
okay.
late.
I'm glad that you're going to be hydrated.
Thanks. This is also a lovely message. Say it out loud.
Oh, I can't see it.
Yeah.
Say it out loud. What do you want to say out loud?
This is our team, our Mama Bloom, my postpartum group.
Oh, right.
During the pandemic, we were each other's like life support, and one of our team members is a therapist. And so as we were all having our individual breakdowns and issues, she just kept reminding us, just say it out loud.
Whatever
Just
it is you need to say.
Say it out loud. Like, we're here, just say it out loud. So it became kind of our like theme for surviving the pandemic. But I think it's also very suiting for postpartum. I think it's helpful for just life, right?
Yeah. So before we get too far into that, for those listening, we have Alison Vaclav with us tonight.
Thank you, guys. I feel so happy to be back. It's been
First
a long
time on
time.
video.
It has been a
I
long
know.
time.
It has been a long time. I feel a little nervous with the video feature,
Hmm.
but
You look great.
Thank you.
Lots of red.
I brought the red lipstick.
For those of you listening, Alison's wearing a shirt with a giant heart on it, and it says "Get in here."
Get in here. I love it so
Get in
much.
here.
Get in here.
It's very
Yeah.
cute.
Thanks.
I do like that. Say it out loud.
Mhm.
I think there's an aspect, we've talked a lot about this maybe, but there's an aspect of figuring out what you're feeling and what you're thinking
Mhm.
that you have to say things out loud. You have to put things to words and speak them. There's something real in that you can't access without doing it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Just in your own mind, in the confines of your own mind, thoughts and feelings can take on a life of their own
Mm-hmm.
that can be consuming. And then you say it out loud and someone else hears it, and the truth of that thing gets into the light
Mm-hmm.
by being witnessed and heard. And so it was very, very powerful for me over the last few years.
Was it kind of this sort of saying that kind of made you start kind of thinking in that way, saying it out loud, or was that kind of prior to this also?
Well, I mean, the pandemic and everything that I was personally struggling with, just I'd never struggled with mental health in that way, like that level of intensity. So I think the necessity to say things out loud and to acknowledge what was going on with me became more real, and it became real in a way I had never needed before. So now I'm like full believer, like say it out loud. So,
It's kind of similar. You do a lot of art journaling and actually teach art journaling.
yeah.
I feel like there's something really similar to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's moving something from inside of you to outside of you is where the clarifying power is.
Yeah, it's expressive journaling, and I like the visual of like you're literally expressing, like pushing something from the inside
To express.
out. And I've thought a lot about that, even just listening to the last two episodes about Mike and your dad, and that phrase, y'all brought it up last week, where he said, so much of what moves us and drives us is just under the waterline
Yeah.
of our consciousness. And that's, I feel like art journaling, which is really just to start with visuals, before words. So you start with imagery, you start with color, you start with all kinds of any kind of just visual expression before you try and make meaning out of it, before you try and assign logic or understanding. It's just the process of letting that part of your brain talk. And we have so much to say. Our subconscious has so much to say, and we have so much to learn from it if you give it space. But our brains are so kind, right? It's like our minds are going to keep us from being overwhelmed by the quantity and quality of all that we carry within us. And so yeah, we have to make space for it to really draw out the understanding, to draw out the truth of what's going on inside us.
I'm going to pull this away from you just a little bit.
Okay.
How do you create space for people? I know there's that, like, how do you draw people in? It's their first time to do PageMate is your company, and like, how do you draw people into that space to start? 'Cause I mean, I could imagine as a beginner, you're like, oh, I don't know what to do, or how do I?
Right. Yeah, that's my favorite because so many people just get triggered by the word art in general. Like automatically you hear that, you're like, oh, I'm not an artist. Like, oh, I'm not a creative. I don't do that stuff, which is so unfortunate because actually we all do. We're creative beings, right? Like every child in every culture around the world creates art. They draw, they dance, they sing.
Yeah.
It's inherent to our humanity. And then at some point we get educated or judged, or something comes in to shut that down, our expression down, natural expression down. And then we adopt that as our identity. I'm not an artist. So my most frequent line when I start groups, I'm like, hey guys, we're at this art journaling workshop. And guess what? You do not have to make art today. Like, we are not here to make art. And so it's about like shifting focus from, I have to make this pretty thing that means something, to, well, maybe you're going to like this thing in the end. Maybe you won't. It doesn't matter. That the value is actually in the process. And the understanding that comes from engaging in that process may not make sense to you today. It may not make sense tomorrow. But I promise you, at some point, whether it's 3 years or, 30 years from now, like this thing that you make is going to be with you, and it will have meaning at some point.
Pablo Picasso said that all children are born artists. The trouble is to remain one as you grow up. And I was just, as you were talking, thinking about how true that is. Like, children draw.
Yeah.
There aren't really children that don't draw. And I wonder why that is. And maybe it's because they're trying to make sense of a world that is completely incomprehensible to them. And there's something exploratory about it. They're not trying to make art. They're trying to explore, to process.
Yeah, to process, to learn. I think it's just so natural in children to express what's going on inside, and to symbolize like your place in the world, and also bring forth your imagination. Like, kids have so much access to imagination that we don't. And it's just the most natural thing to express it.
Do you think we have less access to imagination?
For sure.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. Which this kind of ties into a class that I'm taking right now called Eidetic Imagery. And that's a whole conversation. But
that's what we're here for.
I know, like, it's a whole conversation.
We've got hours. So,
but yeah, because one of the ways to look at it is that our culture is left brain dominant. So left brain is where the language, I'm going to have to move that because I'm going to keep hitting it. Is where language happens, is where strategy happens, it's where logic and reason live. And that is the primary way that our culture engages in society. So imagination is coming out of the right side and in the deeper, more primal parts of the brain. So I don't think like imagination never goes away. Our creativity never goes away. But if we don't make space for it to emerge and to have a life of its own, I don't think we lose it. Maybe our connection and our comfortability in accessing that
definitely
diminishes. I think that's how I would say it.
I think that it's sort of similar to the Adam and Eve story. Adam and Eve eat of the apple, and it's like they wake up, they become aware of their nakedness, and they're ashamed. I think when we're kids, we tend to not have very much shame. We'll be silly, we'll dance, we'll run, we'll climb, we'll do whatever we feel like doing. And then at some point around puberty, you kind of wake up and you're like, oh shit, like people are noticing me and they have thoughts about me, and that's very uncomfortable. And so you become just more aware.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, when we tend to stop doing some of those things that we did naturally as children.
Yeah.
And there's, that's good and bad. Like Eric Neumann, I don't know how you say his name.
I think so.
Something.
Yeah.
He was one of Carl Jung's students, and he wrote this book where he described the proper progression of growing up as you're a child, and then as you grow up, you have to go differentiate yourself from your parents and from the rest of the world and stand up as an individual. But that isn't enough. Once you've done that, towards the second half of your life, you have to start reincorporating what you left behind. You can't just be an individual. You need to be an individual who then consciously and purposefully picks back up what you laid down in your youth and makes proper use of it.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Do you feel like you're there yet?
No. I think it's probably, that's getting close. I can start feeling the need for that. And something in me that's a little bit more calm about that. Because as you're growing up, you want to be mature, you want to be respected, you want autonomy, you want authority. And the idea that you look young or something or act young, you kind of shun that. You want to move out of that. But there's something in me that's, I think, growing a little bit softer as I get older, that's saying, I'm okay with, not knowing, or I'm okay with feeling ashamed, or I'm okay with feeling embarrassed in a way that I wasn't in my 20s and early 30s, maybe.
Right.
And I think that that's something like the proper position to have in order to engage in things like creativity. Is a willingness to try and fail, a willingness to feel embarrassed, a willingness to be ashamed.
Yeah, for sure. That's one of the obstacles to creativity is the self-judgment. And because I think part of too why we stop is that we get judged. Like in school. Well, you're 4 years old, 5 years old at home drawing papers and your house, and mom's loving it, and it's all good.
Yeah.
But then you go to school, and all of a sudden you're getting a grade.
Or comparing yourself,
right?
To other people.
Comparing, and it's like someone's getting more praise for their dog picture than you are, and so there's that comparative thing, and so the judgment starts coming in, and so we have just loads of that by the time we're adults. And so part of my job, so I'm also a creativity coach. So part of my job, one of the strategies for getting around that is to give yourself permission, right? To like, okay, I'm going to make some ugly art. I'm going to write a shitty sentence. It's like to set the objective of doing something bad, because then you succeed at doing the bad thing. But you have this like spark of success that fuels your reward system, and you want to keep going. And so I think there's like, we have to like trick ourselves back into that place of youthful openness.
What's the trick?
Well, the trick of saying, like, for, that example that I just used of like, okay, I'm going to make make a shitty painting. Well, it's like you've just removed the pressure of performance. And that the pressure for performance to perform, like to create this beautiful thing, that's what shuts us down. And so you're saying, okay, I'm going to do it bad. And then you do it. And then that is just starting. It's like you tricked yourself into just starting. And once you start, it's like this whole world opens up.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was thinking of, I was trying to segue that into a quick story. I recently, maybe over the last couple of years, started hanging art on my walls.
Yes.
And that's been an unbelievably profound experience to hang art on the walls. And as a part of that, I really recently went and had a bunch of pictures of my family and some pictures that I and some other people in my family have taken from trips and things like that. I had maybe a dozen of them printed, and I went to thrift stores, spent like a weekend going to thrift stores and buying frames. And then I had mat board cut to all the right sizes and then hung like a dozen pictures up in my living room. And it was this amazing experience that I'm trying to figure out why I felt like it was so profound. And something you said about if you just start, something that you don't expect will unfold in front of you, and it will grab your attention, or it has the potential to grab your attention. And then once it grabs your attention, you start negotiating with it. So at the beginning of this, I thought I really want pictures of my family and specifically my dad up on my walls since he passed away. And when you start to imagine a project like that, you're like, I don't know where to start. You go maybe look at frames online or a framing company, and you're like, this is going to cost me $10,000. This is crazy. And then, but now the thing is starting to unfold and your brain starts responding to it. And I said, okay, well, what if I go to thrift shops? And then you get stuff and it's kind of shitty. And I think, well, what if I took this one and I painted it, or I took this part off this one and combined it with this one? And then you get the prints printed and like, well, which ones are you going to print? And you have to engage in this process.
Yeah.
And once they were all up on the wall and I looked at it, I thought, not only are all of those images and the memories that they evoke meaningful, but there's a whole series of decisions that I made just in getting them onto the wall that reduced an infinite set of possible things I could have done down to what exists in reality on the walls of my house.
Yeah.
And so I not only I see that meaning, the meaning of choices, the meaning of intention, the meaning of love, and then the meaning in the eyes of my loved ones who are looking at me through images. And I think this is profoundly meaningful. And it happens just simply by starting and then responding and negotiating with the process.
Yeah.
And I think that's what art is.
Yeah. I like how you just went with that, like, because it can get so overwhelming, right? When we think of doing something creative, like, and just the overwhelm of thinking, oh my gosh, how much money, what frames, where, and that, I mean, that can shut people down like right there. And so to figure out like, what's the one next step? Like, what's the one thing I could do like right now? And then you have the success of that one step, and that sparks your motivation to keep going. And then it sparks curiosity, and it just keeps feeding on itself if you can just take the one step.
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to projects, I often tell people like, how can you make this easy? How can you make it fun? Like, whatever it is you have to do, whether it's like cleaning up your desk or writing the next Broadway show. It's like, well, what's one step? What's your first step? The easiest thing you could possibly do, like the smallest thing that you make it so small and so doable that you literally cannot fail not doing that step.
Right.
Because once you have that one thing, it's like bam, and then it just keeps going.
Yo, I think I have to turn the AC on.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable.
Do it.
Go for it.
That sounds good. Yeah, we usually have the AC off because it adds a little bit of noise in the background. But I think Texas right now, it starts to get kind of toasty.
Yeah. We haven't switched over to sweat mode yet. Usually I have a time frame in the year where after this certain date, I do not wear sleeves.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is tank tops and spaghetti straps only. Like we've made it to mid-May. It's usually much hotter by now. Excuse me.
Okay.
Good.
That was starting to take up a lot of my mental capacity just thinking about how hot I was. Texas. I love you, Texas. I love you. But that was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I'm glad I'm not alone because I get overwhelmed by sensory experiences very often these days. So, feel you.
I liked that idea of take something small. It's back to the quote, pick something that you could do that you would do.
I was about to say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
I knew
Such a
you were
good one.
sitting on that one.
You took it from me, man.
Well, you were talking about writing a Broadway show. Like that's a big, grand endeavor. And you might sit down and think, I don't know how to write a Broadway show. It's too big. But maybe you could write a story about a person who wants to write a Broadway show but doesn't know how.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you could do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And something I think about a lot is that our brains are capable of generating an instruction set that could keep us occupied infinitely. Like there's so many ways that you can think about things, and you could write yourself instructions for how to spend your every day of the next, the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Essentially, whether or not you would do it, you definitely wouldn't do it, but you have the capacity to do that, the
Sure.
ability, and that amazes me. So if you ever don't know what to do, you can just ask yourself.
You ask yourself a question.
Yeah.
Because our brains are wired to answer questions. And that's another component, I think, of engaging with creativity is to be able to ask yourself the good questions. There's crappy questions and there's good questions, but either way, your brain's going to answer them. So with the Broadway play example, oh my gosh, how can I ever write a Broadway play? Well, you just tasked your brain to figure out how to write a Broadway play. Whether you're conscious of it or not, that question is going to be in the background, your mind is going to be trying to solve that problem. But if you ask yourself, what's a really little step I could take to start writing a Broadway play?
It's interesting, just even in your tone, because I think that's what we do to ourselves too, that it was more of an exasperation in how you asked the first question of, man, how can I ever write a Broadway play where it's I wonder what's small step, what's something that can get me there. I think those tones are also within us that kind of put those roadblocks in our way.
Right. There's a component of mindfulness in that. That is a practice. But yeah, being aware of what kind of questions we're asking ourselves every day, just that in and of itself can be so illuminating.
Well, and to listen for the answers.
Mm-hmm.
You can ask yourself a question and you will get an answer, but you may not want to listen for it. And then often too, you get an answer and you don't do anything about it. The number of times I've written down a to-do list and thought, what is it that I really want to accomplish this weekend, let's say?
Yeah.
And then those to-do lists end up, I always write down more than I'm able to, and I never really come back to them. So there's things that I honestly answered to myself, this is important to me to do, that I don't do. In part because there's not enough time, or I'm too lazy, or too selfish, or too ashamed, and I don't go back to them. And I find that when I do that, they keep yelling at me from the past. Hey, you didn't do that. You thought that was important and then you didn't do it. And I can feel my integrity disintegrating. because that's a hard thing to do, to say, what is it that I really want to do? Answer that honestly. And then if you don't do it, who are you? Who doesn't do the things that they want to do?
I mean, that seems like a really unkind way, though.
Is it?
To me, I'm like, God, that's so harsh, Matt. Because, like, how are we to know what's really, really important in your lived experience? It's like, yeah, I value this and this and this, and all of these things are important. But then there comes your like real life, and that you can't control, and you do your best. And so I think if you make a list for the weekend and you put 20 things on that list, if you get like
2,
if you get 2 or 3 done, like winning, you know,
I mean, I guess it doesn't sound harsh to me, because I think about that and I think, man, who could I be, and how much better would life be and my home be if I did all the things that I know that I want to do, that would be good to do.
Okay, like I can hear that, and I appreciate that. But are you also giving yourself full credit for the things that you do? What did you accomplish that did not do? I saw your smile.
I can't not think of Chandler being on Friends.
I love it.
Like, okay, so you write down this list. But also you probably did a whole bunch of things that were not on that list.
That's true.
And do you get credit for all of those things?
I try to go add the things to the list that I end up doing, because you think of stuff, during the middle of the day or whatever. Or I didn't realize how complicated one thing was going to be, so I had to do some other things. I try to update the list.
That's impressive, honestly.
Yeah.
On your list, is there rest?
No.
Why not?
I think I have written take a nap on a list before.
Like, rest is a really important.
Or I'll write Wim Hof breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Rest, play, connect with myself. I mean, I feel like there's so many things that are so valuable, but they're not productive. And so they would never make a list, but they count as like really valuable parts of your life.
Right.
And I feel like those are the things that we don't give credit for. So we end up pressuring ourselves or feeling like failures, when actually we are more than not living the life that we want to live.
See, I don't make lists. I don't.
You're not a list maker.
I'm not a list maker, but maybe in a different way.
Well, that's not true.
Yeah.
Like, you write down compartments of time during which you're going to do things. That's a list.
Also, hashtag whiteboard.
Yeah.
Well, I think
you have like literally 800 square feet of whiteboard.
You list ideas and not tasks.
Yeah.
Would that be fair to say?
That'd probably be more fair. Like, within this time frame, I want to think about this idea. It doesn't always happen, but again, I feel like that's more of a suggestion. So I don't know. Maybe I'm out of lists. To me, are very confining. I don't know. Like, even I have a problem with my compartments, honestly. Like, but I'm also I don't take them off. I just took a couple off of my sections just because I was never doing them. So I had to be honest with myself. Yeah. But then there's other ones that I might not do all the time, but I still like them there because it reminds me, hey, you've put this time towards this, And I've also been kind of questioning, like, well, maybe I need to actually spend more time. Because I think too is like what I found is I end up trying to put too many things into a space, and that I need to kind of allow a little bit more freedom. Like, just today I was thinking, maybe I should just think of like, what one thing am I going to get done today? Like, what one block of time I should have on my calendar instead of 3 blocks or something like that, Just, then again, maybe it's just a season too, where sometimes you're more hyper productive and sometimes you're not, and that you kind of have to adjust your list or write down the new things, So maybe I am lying. I do make a list. Never mind.
You just had to say it out loud.
That's right.
That's true. Look, you're teaching us so much. I think one thing that I'm curious of on yours is, because obviously I know you pretty well, but that you kind of went through the creativity coach part, and then art journaling, but also just working with Mama Bloom. I guess I see that you really have this enjoyment of everything's kind of more relational in what you do, but it's also on the creative part, and also engaging with your inner being. Why is that specifically interesting to you? As far as even with as you were a doula too, there's this part that you're helping other people connect with things that are inside them. So it seems like that's kind of like a theme for the things that you're interested in.
Yeah, I would say so. And it probably comes from what I now understand is that I've lived very disconnected from my own self for most of my life. And now that I'm realizing that, now that I am in this have been for several years now, intense process of differentiation, I realize my way of being has been to be very disconnected from my own inner world. And when I've realized that, it was terrifying. It felt like existential terror, to realize I don't know who I am. I don't know how to connect with what is really in me. And then art journaling was a really gentle way of doing that. And it's been so powerful for me. And I think that I know not everyone's going to love it. Not everyone's going to be open to it. Especially men for some reason. And I still have like such a question mark about that, but
you had one guy on there. He kind of gave you some feedback when.
Yeah, he did. A friend of mine joined my last online art journal session, and it was the first man that had come to my workshops, and it was great. And then I spoke with him afterward about why are men, I know some that are kind of interested, but no one jumps in. No one has ever done the workshop except for him. And so
what do you have to say about it?
He had some great things to say about it. He said, for one, he's already in his own personal process of trying to heal and grow. And so he's working with a therapist. He's doing lots of inner work on himself. And then, so his wife had seen my email, and these are past doula clients of mine. So I know them. They know me. He's like, so I'm already doing my inner work. Ruth told me that she's been to your workshops and she loves it and she approves. So she was like, go ahead and do this. She's like, do this. You'll love it. So he had that reassurance, and then just the safety of knowing me already. But he brought up an interesting point about safety. He was like, I don't think men feel safe enough in a container, especially a container full of women, to do this vulnerable work. And that made me really sad, but I feel like it's probably very true.
What do you think the danger is?
Well, he's coming in to this group aware of there's probably going to be mostly women. It's a very vulnerable space. People are processing inner work. And for a lot of women, just having a man in the room can cause guards to go up. Mm-hmm. He's a videographer and he often does weddings. And so he was talking about how his tricks and strategies for making he has to film the bride getting ready with her bridesmaids. And so he walks in the room and he's like, I know the things to say to get everyone, disarmed and just comfortable with him being in this sacred women's space. So it's he's aware that women just his presence can cause guards to go up, and he doesn't want to do that. And then also just this, I think there's a stigma around men being vulnerable and doing inner work in general.
I think if you're trying to heal or you're trying to figure out who you are, and you actually ask yourself that question, like, what's my inner world actually like? You might not want to be honest about the answer to that.
Sure.
And I think it may be that men are more afraid to answer that question honestly, even in a piece of art or in a private journal entry, than women.
Why do you think that is?
Do you think that's true? I'm trying to figure out if I'm just like mapping that on men and women in unfairly, but I think part of the reason might be, well, if you're a man and you ask yourself, you might notice some anger inside of you, and you ask yourself, what am I angry about, and how angry am I? What if the answer is enough that I can't keep myself under control if I answer that honestly?
Right.
Or I'm ashamed. Well, what am I ashamed about? The answer to that might be everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's part of men's experience in the world that our value is in standing up, doing things with integrity and discipline, something like offering the world some amount of security or reliability.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we're afraid that if we're not good enough for that, then what are we? What's possibly left? I think women have insecurity as well, but perhaps it doesn't go quite that deep. And it's a different kind of insecurity that women have than men. I think men tend to not want to look at those things deeply because it might invalidate them completely.
Mm. Yeah, if that's the case, that would be terrifying. And I would not want to do that in front of a group of women.
Right.
Well, I think there's also, I mean, when a guy comes into a space where that's kind of maybe more designated for women, or that there's just a lot of women in that space, is you're also dealing with, especially if you're the only guy there. If it's a group of people where it's like 5 guys and 5 girls or whatever, that's a little bit different. But 1 or 2, it's like there's that sort of like, if there's anything, I think if a woman or women have something against a man, he kind of takes on that persona of that. So I think it's harder for one guy to come into the room, which I would say, I don't know if that would be the same vice versa. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, that would really come down to the facilitator and who's holding that space, right? Someone would have to be, aware and competent to make it feel safe. Mm-hmm. But I guess my curiosity is, okay, so maybe art journaling or expressive journaling, maybe that's just like pigeonholed into this like crafty women's world thing. Like maybe there's just a stereotype around it that feels avoidable. Or like, well, that's like girl stuff. And I also think that circling up is a very feminine way. We tend to make circles and like relate one-on-one. But the art journaling online especially is not that. It's a very individual process that you do just simultaneously with other people. And I just feel so curious because what I'm doing and why it quote unquote works is it's not feminine. It's just human. The human brain, the deeper parts of the brain, the right side of the brain, the language of that is image for all of us. And so you're making space to let image come out first and then the words. And that's just, it would work. It would work for men just as well as women. But for some reason, men aren't interested. And so I'm like, is there a different way? I don't know. Or maybe it's just like.
Well, let me try this on, because in this type of thing, I would rather do this by myself. Like I wouldn't have as much interest in doing it with other people. But I don't know if that's like just a me thing or,
right.
if that's maybe more males or kind of that way. Like that's something I don't know why that would be the case, but
Sure.
yeah, I don't have any thoughts on that? Because I feel like I do some of these things that you are talking about, but I would never think about doing that with other people.
You do art journaling when I don't know about it? You have a secret art journal somewhere, babe?
Well, you've seen the things like I draw and stuff like that. I mean, I don't tear pages out, but like, but as far as like images and symbols and stuff like that,
right?
I do see like there's certain things I'll think about, and it's in a symbol, and therefore I kind of like somehow represent the symbol outside of myself, and it starts to take on a story of its own.
Yeah.
So. But I don't. It wouldn't occur to me to do that with other people, or that,
or to seek guidance in that.
Yeah. Well, I just listen to you. I learn from you, and I just do it myself.
That's news to me.
Yeah,
I learned from a lot of things you do. You do all these cool things, and I just take them, incorporate them.
Good. Carry on.
I mean, I do relate with why men wouldn't want to sign up for an art journaling class, but I'm trying to understand what it is in me that relates to that. I mean, I think it's something where, like, if we were all hanging out and you said, hey, let's try this art journal thing, or this, and we just in person, impromptu, I would probably put up some resistance to it and then do it and really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I've told you that I wanted to come to your workshops, but I haven't done it.
Yeah.
And I think that has something to do with, I want to be somehow active and productive in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that men tend to want to act upon the world to feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
And so in general, I'm like, well, it's Saturday or it's Sunday. I want to go do stuff. I want to work on projects. I want to fix things, change things, reorganize things, build things. Yeah. And art, expressive journaling. You're using art and expressive interchangeably. Are you trying to rebrand to expressive journalism? Journaling? Journalism?
No,
I said.
No, it's just I just go back and forth on it.
Okay. But that doesn't seem to me to fit into any of those categories that I just listed.
It's not productive.
Not in a way that something about my masculinity responds to.
Yeah. Fair enough. Any ideas about what would make it feel more?
Well, and then I was thinking about what Michael said about it. You would do it on your own. Because I think, well, despite everything I just said, I really enjoy spending about an hour between like 9:30 and 10:30 or 9:30 and 11 sitting at my desk and journaling, just writing.
Yeah.
Quiet. But there's something to me that's really important that it happen at the end of the night. Like, I don't really do that during the day. So maybe if you did an art journaling class at like 9:30 or 10.
Call it Matt's class.
Matt's class.
Okay. Interesting. Well, do you think that's a masculine thing to want to do more introspection and reflection at the end of the day? Is that a Matt thing or is that a male thing?
I don't know. You have any ideas?
It's probably more of a Matt thing.
A Matt thing?
Yeah, because I think people process things at different times. And I kind of wonder if, just group stuff in general. Well, I think of Andrea. I mean, she's a pretty big introvert, and she does this stuff. You guys do that together, and I mean, she really does. It sounds like gets a lot from that sort of group type situation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to. I mean, I want to try to be careful of not naming things like masculine and feminine, and that there are certain personalities. But then I do see how women sort of gather in a certain way and men gather in a certain way. Mm-hmm. There are distinctions, and it's not that. Again, men can't art journal. It's like that's. I think I actually think in today's world, like men have a lot more freedom to maybe be outside of some of those more traditional spheres and stuff like that, which is right. Kind of cool. So
I need to figure out a way to frame art journaling as conquering the world. And then maybe I could have some dudes show up.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a similar problem that we encounter too in the postpartum work that I do, because, we have these postpartum moms groups and we come together and it's just like so rich and so supportive, and there's just nothing for dads.
No, there's nothing.
In terms of
maybe say a little bit more about the postpartum, just so that people understand what that is and what you do.
Yeah. So I work for Mama Bloom, and we host 6-week-long postpartum groups for moms that just had new babies, or maybe they have older kids, but they also just added a baby. And within these groups, we facilitate the moms they experience peer support. We're bringing resources. We're creating community. We're creating, kind of battling against isolation and all kinds of, the hard things that can happen in the postpartum world. And so we often talk about partners, and they'll ask us like, I wish there was something like this for my husband. And we hear that a lot, but there's really not. I mean, the only thing that comes close is that there's an organization for postpartum parents where both parents come. They're called PIP, and I just did a workshop with them. They were awesome. Anyway, but it doesn't exist. And I feel like it has something to do with this difference of ways of being between males and females. Like, we are so relational, and so it's so natural for us to like sit. I heard someone describe it this week, actually. Like, women will sit like eye to eye, like we're like face to face looking at each other, but men gather and stand shoulder to shoulder and look out. Like, that would be a more masculine way of gathering, which feels true to me.
Yeah, there's some evolutionary, like, I've heard some evolutionary explanations of that, as far as like men looking out, looking for the danger. And so kind of being more used to talking side by side because you're out looking.
Right.
Standing watch,
and women are gathering in the hearth and home and,
caring for the young, gathered around the young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, even with your podcast, Shores of Ignorance, like what comes up in my mind is the two of y'all standing side by side, like looking out at the ocean.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so there's something natural about that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe a container for art journaling for men would have to be reoriented in some way. I don't know.
I mean, I noticed after I got divorced, I spent some time looking for groups for single dads. Whether it's to figure out how to, navigate being a single dad, or being a divorced parent, or, anything, because you're going through something that's crazy new and confusing, and there's a lot on the line. And I found very few groups, and the groups that I did find did not seem to be active at all. So I think, to the extent that people try to start things for dads, for men, the men just don't come.
Yeah.
They don't show up.
Right.
I kind of get it, because part of me was like, I had a fairly contentious divorce, and part of me was like, well, if I go and try to seek support from other men on what I'm going through, then I'm going to have to talk about what I'm going through, and that's going to expose me to danger, whether through litigation or personally with my kids. I mean, there's like a part of me that I'm just going to bury that. I'm not going to speak it out loud.
Yeah.
Because it's like, say it out loud. It's going to make it real, more real. And I was trying to be as careful as I could possibly be, and the idea of going and venting to a bunch of strange dads about my experience in an attempt to get camaraderie or validation or anything, felt like a risk that I was very hesitant to take.
Sure. Yeah, it makes so much sense when you put it like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you guys think that men need peer support?
I think we all do. I don't think it's good for anybody to live their lives alone.
Mm-hmm.
But, when we talked about It's back to that same book I referenced earlier from the student of Carl Jung. When he describes the feminine and masculine archetypes, he has this great line, which is that the feminine is what is. The masculine has to emerge from that. It has to become. And so I think that there's a natural part of masculinity that doesn't want support, doesn't want help. It wants to differentiate and individuate and not need anybody. Well, that's no good. And Neumann says that, like, it's part of, well, you got to go reincorporate what you've differentiated from. I think it's harder for the masculine to do that than the feminine. And I'm using the archetypes there, not talking specifically about men and women, but given that those archetypes map roughly onto men and women, it does seem true to me that men are most likely to be like, let me do it, I don't need help.
Yeah.
I've heard this in the same in some ways of why men have a higher sexual drive than women do, because it makes them seek out that, you know, that companionship, you know, because
we wouldn't do it otherwise.
We wouldn't do it otherwise.
Well, so this is going to be a huge can of worms to open, but the three of us were talking about this seminar that I shared with y'all by this man named David Schnarch.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think
that's how it's said. It's like Schnarch. Schnarch. Yeah.
Schnarch.
And I would love to talk more in depth about everything that he said, because it's a really brilliant seminar. But one of the things he said was that as the human species evolved, we went from females having a mating season, so being in heat once a year, to having this month-long menstrual period. And part of the effect of that was, you know, if the females are going to be in heat once a year, men are going to come around during that point in time. But then the rest of the time, they're not going to come around. They're going to be gone. They're going to be off doing whatever they're doing, fighting, building, breaking down.
Looking for the other in heat women.
Yeah. But once you move to the cycle where the man doesn't know when he's going to get sex, it's going to be all the time or very frequently.
Yeah.
That actually is an evolutionary force to make us build relationships. And relationships helped evolve us and grow us into the intelligent species that we are. And so there was a forcing mechanism there.
I find that stuff absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
Just even like the idea of hidden ovulation, you know, and that even you see all the cultures built around this sort of idea of faithfulness, because, you know, only the woman knows that it's her baby. A man cannot know or if that kid is his kid, or his part of his genes. And you see culture sort of built around that sort of idea of, why there's marriage and monogamy and stuff like that, is that it's more for the man than it is for the woman. But then also there's that part where, you know, to have that partner that helps you raise the kid and protect the kid and feed the kid. And, you know, I just find it fascinating that a lot of that's kind of just built into our just physiology in our relationship, male and female too. So.
But back to your question about, do you think men need support? Is that how you asked the question?
Yeah. Well, peer support groups. Well, and someone, was it you that said earlier, like it comes back in older age? Did someone just say that, or did I make that up? Anyway, something made me think about like all the old men at Barton Springs.
Oh yeah, totally.
And
I love it.
You know, like my dad.
I'm going to put my Speedo on and go down there. I'm sure somebody will talk to me.
It's the truth, man.
Well, and there's literally a statue of 3 old guys sitting around talking. And then like my dad, he every Saturday morning goes down to the pawn shop and meets his buddies, and they have coffee and have a powwow every
Yeah.
Saturday morning. So it's not hard to, like, I know men the old men gather
Yeah.
in a way that seems way more feminine, but I don't see middle-aged men doing that as much. I don't know.
Not as much. Maybe it is the part of you that as you get older, as we were talking about at the beginning of the conversation, the part of you that softens and is a little bit more okay with embarrassment and things like that, that allows you to reincorporate what you left behind as you grew up. And so maybe since men do have a tendency to try to individuate and differentiate more than women do, it takes more for us to, it takes that movement into older age to start reincorporating ourselves into things like relationship and community. Because when we're young men, it's like men are very romantically infatuated with ideas like the Lone Ranger. Like, I'm going to get my horse and my gun and just take to the range and head west. And I'm going to be this shadowy, mythical figure that people shudder when they hear about and ride into town for a whiskey and
I mean, but is that unique to our culture?
No, I think there's something different. It's interesting. Just
I'm using
men
Western
across,
imagery, but
men across many cultures is that,
like in Japan, I think it would be like a ninja.
Yeah. Or a samurai in Chinese culture. Yeah. Well, it's interesting because women, they have something to offer the world inherently, which is to give life. And there's something that just, I don't think men don't have that same thing. They don't to bring to the world, that we have to make something. And you kind of see us even with a lot of the dating profiles and our stats, which is, women will date across the economic spectrum and up. Men will date down. They'll date anyone along the whole spectrum of the. So it's expected of men too to be at least equal to their mate or better. And I'm just speaking economic terms, but I think that's also status, probably in a lot of the metrics, And so I think there's something inherent in that women bring life into this world, and they're looking for a mate that's at least equal, if not better. It's like where men are willing to date down the social classes or economic classes because, they provide something that is that protection, is that life protection, which it doesn't matter where you are on that spectrum.
How does that relate to men romanticizing the Lone Ranger idea in their youth?
I don't know if I was addressing that specifically.
Okay.
Just more in general, how like men and women in their mating strategies are different, and that men have to make something of themselves, and that there's a sort of Lone Ranger aspect. It's like, and then you have in all those stories with a Lone Ranger, or you have these women that are like, oh my gosh, it's like they see this strong man that's able to provide and protect, and so they become more desirable. And you see that in our cultures too, like men that have the Ferrari or responsibility, or they're more desirable than men who don't have that.
Yes, that tied it together for me.
Thanks, I did.
That men have this inherent drive to go make something of themselves, and in some imagery that's represented in sort of the Western epic as the Lone Ranger, but it's the idea that you go out and you make something of yourself, and then once you sort of come back into town, to the proverbial town, you have this status that attracts women, and the women then reincorporate you into the community and the culture. They culture you, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, because very few women will want to date the guy in the basement playing video games, or a guy will date the maid or whatever and marry that person. It's like the guy's less desirable than the woman in that instance. I don't think I'm making this point very well, but I've definitely seen this sort of like maybe men are less picky than women are.
I think that we were talking about something and then you thought about that idea and you went, oh, I love that idea. Okay. And then you just wanted to talk about that idea.
That's probably too. True too.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So
men taking art classes.
Yeah, if you're a man out there, consider an art journaling class.
All right, I'll be more on topic here. So like whenever I was a stay-at-home dad for a year and a half, and I was looking for a guys group too. You know, it's like, oh, is there other dads around, taking care of their kids? And so I looked up this one group, and it was called SADS, stay-at-home dads. It's called SADS.
Yeah, that's going to be a no for me, dog.
What the hell? Yeah.
How did that even come into existence? It's like the worst.
Nobody wrote that down and looked at it and was like, yeah, you can't name something that if you want people to come.
Yeah, obviously I didn't
if
go.
If it's not about grief.
Come join the SADS.
I was curious enough to look. Maybe Allison looked and said that was here.
That was all you.
That was me. Okay, cool.
You're proud of yourself.
Well, I was curious enough to actually look for, hey, is there another group of dads that, take care of their kids? And that totally I was not interested in that at all. I don't think I didn't go to one like meetup or anything like that. So.
Well, I am going to come to your art expressive journalism.
Okay, well
journalism.
Journalism. Well, here's my question. Here's another question. If it was an only men's group, would that be more comfortable or less comfortable?
I have a feeling men would be more likely to respond to that. Mm-hmm. If you made a deal of it, like this is going to be men's only. Yeah.
Okay. Would it matter if it was a group of men that you knew or a group of men that you didn't know?
I don't think it would matter.
No? Okay.
I wonder if it would matter if it was a guy leading it or a woman leading it. What do you think?
Better if a woman led it.
I can see that.
I think.
Yeah.
I don't currently know any men at all that lead art journaling sessions, so I can train y'all up.
Yeah.
Well, so since I'm in your world a lot with the whole postpartum thing, I do understand the need for men, somewhere for men to like, when I used to go with you on your second or third doula meetup, that was so helpful for guys to have someone to talk to, be like, hey, can I have sex with my wife? Yes, you can. It's like
after a while.
And then, well, I was talking about even before, it's
okay.
like, yeah, up to whenever they give birth. And it's like, just be able to say like, and then afterwards, like, yeah, there's a time period where that's not very good. And then there's kind of up to you guys to kind of negotiate that beyond, a month or two, and that's something that, those are just real things that, you need to hear as a man too. It's like, because you're thinking that, I was like, when's the next time I can have sex with my wife? Is it like, does she have to stop breastfeeding? Is this years from now, or like what is this?
When can I get back to the sex?
But it's true. It's like we have a desire. We want that,
and it's that's very real. And they would never ask me those questions.
No, they'd feel ashamed to ask you that question.
I obviously would like invite any kind of questions, but like they would never ask me. And it was like beautiful that you got to have those moments where
it was more, we didn't talk just about sex, but it was other things too, as far as like, how to support your wife, in the first few months, and what can you do, even though you feel like you might be useless and that kind of stuff. So
sure. Yeah.
It wasn't just about sex.
No, that's good. Okay. So you're feeling like it would be more comfortable with a man leading the group.
Oh, I don't.
No.
Okay.
Oh, I'm probably not the right person to ask this question.
I'm not going to be in this group ever. So over to you, Matt.
Yeah, I think Matt's more good in this area. I'm more, I like doing things on my own. So that's,
I know you do.
As we just talked about for the last hour.
Totally.
Well, why don't we wrap this one up here tonight?
Oh, has it already been that long?
Yeah.
Oh, that went fast.
It did go fast.
Oh, I'm like, this is fun.
We'll continue the conversation.
I want to come back.
Please do. I always love when you're on.
So fun. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Love you both. Love you all
too.
out there. Thanks for listening.